Dawn, June 22, 1941. Slash from across the western border. Thousands of German guns erupt at once. Slash shells and bombs tear through the sky over Belarus. Slash Brest fortress shakes under the barrage, its walls collapsing, radios falling silent. Slash in the rubble, Red Army soldiers claw their way out of the smoke, scrambling into shattered bunkers. Slash they have no orders, no reinforcements, but they fight anyway. Slash alongside them. Nurses and civilians carry ammunition into the fight and drag the wounded back from the flames. Slash on a crumbling wall, a scrawled message reads, "I'm dying, but I will not surrender." Slash only months earlier, the Soviet Union believed it was at peace with Germany. Slash the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact of 1939 had carved Eastern Europe into spheres of influence and lulled Stalin into a false sense of security. Slash the Red Army had marched into Poland, the Baltic states, and Bessarabia, extending its borders without building proper defenses. Slash Stalin dismissed mounting intelligence that German forces were massing on the frontier, convinced it was a British ploy to drag him into war. Slash the Great Purge of the late 1930s had gutted the officer corps, leaving a fearful, inexperienced command that hesitated to report bad news. Slash experience had been replaced by obedience. Slash in 1941, 3/4 of Red Army officers had been in their posts for less than a year. Slash on paper, the Red Army boasted the world's largest fleet of tanks and aircraft. Slash in reality, most were obsolete, undermaintained, and poorly supplied. Slash brand new T-34s and KV-1s made up only a fraction of the force. Slash airfields crowded with outdated fighters sat exposed near the border, perfect targets for the Luftwaffe. Slash Soviet doctrine emphasized offensive strikes, not layered defenses. Slash when the front line broke, there was little behind it. Slash the German invasion ripped through every weak point at once. Slash within the first day, the Soviet Air Force lost between 1,800 and 2,000 aircraft, many destroyed on the ground. Slash communications collapsed. Slash Stalin initially refused to believe Hitler had betrayed him, forbidding commanders to fire back across the border. Slash entire units were surrounded before they could even form up. Slash yet small pockets of resistance, like Brest Fortress or the lone KV-2 tank blocking a supply route near Rzyni, became legends of Soviet grit. Slash in the weeks that followed, German pincers closed around Białystok, Minsk, and later Kiev, capturing or killing hundreds of thousands of Soviet troops. Slash behind the lines, whole factories were dismantled and loaded onto trains for the journey east, even as German bombers struck the rail yards. Slash civilians formed militias and partisan bands in Belarus and Ukraine to ambush convoys and sabotage rail lines. Slash by late summer, Army Group Center was pressing toward Smolensk, the gateway to Moscow. Slash, but prolonged battles were wrecking the German timetable. Slash autumn brought the infamous Rasputitsa, seas of mud that bogged down vehicles and supply lines. Slash Stalin put General Zhukov in charge of Moscow's defense, mobilizing reserves, digging fortifications, and receiving the first trickles of Lend-Lease aid through Murmansk, trucks, raw materials, food. Slash as the ground froze, German forces were exhausted. Slash from the rear, the Red Army massed over 1 million troops, artillery, and new tank brigades on the flanks of the overextended Wehrmacht. Slash on December 5, 1941, the Soviet counteroffensive began. Slash in the following weeks, German units were driven back 60 to 150 miles from the capital. Slash for the first time, the Wehrmacht was forced into a large-scale retreat. Slash Moscow was saved. Slash from June to December 1941, the Soviet Union suffered more than 4.5 million casualties, including over 2 million prisoners who faced grim fates in captivity. Slash yet the Red Army endured. Slash the evacuation of industry and the sheer will to fight had blunted Hitler's plan for a lightning victory. Slash Operation Barbarossa had failed. Slash the myth of German invincibility was broken, and the tide of the war began to turn. Slash what began as a surprise strike meant to crush the Soviet Union in a single summer became the opening act of a 4-year struggle. Slash out of the ruins of Brest Fortress and the frozen fields outside Moscow, a new, hardened Red Army would rise, and the war in the East would never be the same. Slash.